He was more than just a gangster. He was a shadow over Jouberton. Paul Nguzo Ndamoyi's name carries weight, not because of fame, but because of fear. To speak it out loud was dangerous. In the dark corners of taverns, people whispered it with caution. His name was whispered, not spoken. Alas, who'd have thought one day that name would only remind the Northwest of its dark past and not necessarily instill fear in anyone anymore? Paul's rise didn't begin with power. It started in broken homes and quiet streets where struggle was normal. He grew up without guidance, left to survive however he could. Hunger shaped his choices, and the streets raised him. By the time he was a teenager, crime wasn't a choice, it was survival. His first run-ins with the law were minor: shoplifting, brawls, and petty theft. But something darker lived inside him. He enjoyed the fear he caused. That hunger for control drove him deeper into violence. His sharp mind and cold heart made him dangerous. Other gangsters noticed him. He didn't just fight to survive, he fought to win. Older criminals gave him space, sensing what he was becoming. He learned fast and never made the same mistake twice. Within years, he wasn't following orders, he was giving them. Paul found his home in the gang called Al-Qaeda. They weren't connected to the terrorist group, but they wanted that same fear. Under Paul's rise, they got it. He didn't just join, he took over. Slowly, he became the most feared man in the region. He expanded their reach beyond and he introduced extortion, protection rackets, and black market deals. If you owned a shop in Jouberton, you paid Paul. If you didn't, you disappeared. Some said he had his own graveyard somewhere outside town. People who crossed him were never seen again. Stories spread of burnings and midnight. Even his own crew feared him more than they respected him. He didn't lead with charisma, he led with violence. Silence was loyalty, and fear was law. Extension 13 became his kingdom. No police dared enter without backup. Inside, Paul's word was the only rule. He paid off who he needed, threatened who he couldn't. He built an empire out of shadows, and no one could touch him. Even the police knew his name, but didn't say it often. Investigations always hit a dead end. Evidence vanished. Witnesses lost their memory. Court cases fell apart before they began. Fear silenced truth, and the law felt powerless. The community suffered, but they didn't speak. People lived in quiet terror, pretending not to see what happened at night. Children learned early to stay silent. Mothers prayed he wouldn't notice their sons. The town belonged to him, and everyone knew it. Years passed, and Paul Lonely grew stronger. He moved like a ghost, never seen when expected, always there when feared. Rumors said he had people everywhere: mechanics, nurses, police officers. No one could say who worked for him, so everyone was careful. No cameras, no trails, no evidence. That was his way. He used burner phones, moved locations, and never got too comfortable. Even if someone wanted to betray him, they had nothing solid to give. He ruled from the shadows, untouchable and unchallenged. But nothing lasts forever. Power makes enemies, and behind every quiet ally is a loud rival waiting to strike. Paul knew this. He felt it. He just didn't know when or how it would end. He trusted few and tested everyone. Loyalty wasn't earned, it was demanded. Betrayal was punished swiftly and publicly. He wasn't just feared for his actions, he was feared for his mind. Calculated, patient, always 5 steps ahead. Yet cracks were starting to show. Rumors of internal arguments reached the streets. Some whispered that he was losing grip. Others said he had become too violent, even for his own men. The balance he once held was starting to slip. His rivals watched closely. So did the police. They couldn't touch him before, but they hadn't stopped watching. For years, they studied his every move, waiting. They didn't need him to slip, they just needed proof. One mistake, one connection. That's all it would take. But Paul didn't believe he could fall. Not really. He had dodged law and betrayal. His name was legend. His power felt permanent. To him, fear was stronger than any badge. The streets would never forget him. or so he thought. He had made a mistake years earlier, but it hadn't caught up to him yet. When it did, it wouldn't come with a warning. It would come fast, and it would come hard. He didn't see it, but it was already on its way. In Jouberton, March 2022 started out like any other month. It was quiet, tense, and full of fear. Things changed one night, though. A group of friends laughed as they left a bar and walked home in the dim light of the street. For a short time, it seemed like no one was afraid on the streets. After that, there was a loud that broke the silence. The man who fell on the sidewalk was 43-year-old Thabo Nsai. He was hit in the chest, and as he gasped for air, poured out of the wound. His friends screamed and ran away, going from being happy to being scared. The didn't run or get scared. Paul Ndamoyi stood still in the dark and then disappeared like a ghost into the night. In Jouberton, there had been before, but this one was different. They didn't just take advantage of Thabo, he was one of their own. His wasn't an accident. Some people said it smelled like betrayal and came from the top. The atmosphere changed inside the gang. Some people thought Thabo went too far. Some people said he had become too powerful. It didn't matter if it was for revenge, power, or a personal message. This was a hit. A cold, clear execution meant to send a message. The message got through to everyone. The shock was felt all through the neighborhood. Once, the silence ended. People spoke, but they kept their voices low. Kids were told by their moms to stay home early. Jouberton became even more gloomy than before. The was heard by the unit that fights gangs. They had seen Paul for years, but this was the first real thing they got from the streets. There was blood on the road, a known victim, and finally, a name was given. The unit moved slowly but steadily into action. They did not want to scare him. They wanted to catch him. They began quietly following leads. There was no press or noise. They tracked movements, listened to calls, and looked for patterns. Then someone gave a clear, anonymous tip. There was someone ready to talk near the fire. Paul was said to be hiding in Extension 13 in the tip. The police held off until they were sure. It had to be a great plan. If you made one mistake, he would be gone again. But this time, they were ahead. Paul didn't fight back when the police stormed the place. He was calm, just like the night the house was. He might have known they were coming. He might not have cared. They did find what they needed inside the house, though. A rifle magazine that was fully loaded and several rounds of ammunition were found. These were the same ones that were used the night Thabo. Paul's defense was finally broken, but it wasn't enough to convict him yet. He hadn't been seen in years. There was something. The detectives didn't have a party. They knew the game was still going on. However, they knew it was the closest they had ever been. Paul had finally fallen, and the walls became tighter. One mistake was enough to ruin the world he ruled. It was felt in the streets, too. There was fear in the air as people looked at each other. No one was safe if Paul could be touched. Things got worse in the gang, spread of paranoia, and things started to change in terms of power. The story about him was breaking for the first time. He was no longer hidden. He was subject to the law. Something had changed behind his calm face. When people know the end is near, even kings get scared. It was more than just another crime that Thabo Nai was. It was a big moment. It showed where Paul was weak, opened doors, and backed him into a corner. Even though he hadn't fallen yet, the floor below him was already breaking. The king was still alive, but his castle had been broken into. The raid began just as the sun was going down. Officers from the unit that fights gangs moved quickly and went straight to Extension 13. Paul Ndamoyi, the most feared gang leader in the Northwest, was sitting in one of the quiet homes. He wasn't quick. He wasn't mean. He just stood up and gave up, as if he had been waiting for them the whole time. There weren't any exciting scenes or There was only the cold silence of a man who knew the game was over. Police put him in handcuffs and searched the house. They found what they were looking for: live rounds of ammunition and a magazine that was fully loaded. These were the same kind that were used to kill Thabo Nets. They finally had solid proof that Ndamoyi was responsible for a. It was big news when he was arrested. It shook the streets. People all over the world saw the picture of Paul in handcuffs, and thought that even giants could fall. Some saw it as a victory and proof that there was still hope for justice. But for some, it made them afraid. They were afraid of who would pay the price for what they were about to do. On May 11, 2022, Ndamoyi went to court for the first time at the Klerksdorp Magistrates Court. He was charged with and having without a permit. He looked more like a businessman than a because he was dressed like everyone else. The charges, on the other hand, were too heavy to ignore. In spite of having all eyes on him, he still asked for bail. As the request was made, there were whispers in the courtroom. People outside of the building were angry. How could someone who is suspected of someone so badly even think about getting away with it? But this was Paul. He had broken the rules before. He was the only one who could change the system. Getting caught by the police caused chaos in the gang. Al-Qaeda's group no longer had a leader. Various groups started to compete for power. Some people wanted to get back at them. A few people wanted to keep the empire together. No longer were the streets calm, they were tense and ready to watch. There were rumors that Paul was still in charge. Some people said he was giving orders from jail. Messages were getting out by visiting or using guards who were not honest. Some people thought he was making plans to come back. Some people thought he was using prison to settle old scores without getting his hands dirty. Then there was another June 2022. A 40-year-old man with ties to the same gang was during the day. The brutal happened quickly and made it clear that it was personal. Was the related to Thabo Nisi or a warning to those who want to take Paul's throne? There was no answer. They didn't say anything, just like before. But people had their own ideas. Some people were sure that Paul had given the order from his cell. Others thought that rival groups were cleaning the house. In either case, the blood was still coming out. The violence hadn't stopped when he was arrested. It had just moved. Even with everything going on, Paul stayed calm. There were no words or signs of fear. His lawyers moved forward with the bail request. But the people outside knew he was guilty. If he was let go, more people would die. Just being there with him was off balance, and everyone knew it. There are no safe spots inside prison walls. Paul may have been famous on the outside, but power works differently on the inside. Both old and new people were against him. Some people wanted help. Others wanted to get even. His name was still important, but it didn't mean he would always be safe. His image began to fade on the streets. The story of Paul was being questioned by violence he could not control. His reputation got worse with every new rumor and change in his allies. People saw him not as a king for the first time, but as a man caught in a storm he made. His empire didn't fall quickly. It happened slowly and violently. The group that used to blindly follow him has now broken up into smaller groups, each with its own goals. Some people still thought he would come back to life. Others had already moved on, making new ways for power and control to flow. But the real question kept people up at night, everywhere in Jouberton, from the courtrooms to the streets. Was Paul Ndamoyi safest in prison, or was it the most dangerous place for him? Were his enemies scared of him enough to wait, or were they already making plans to kill him from the outside? They all thought it, but no one said it out loud. Paul might still be able to live if he stayed in jail. His freedom would not last long, though. Someone would make sure of that. Power had cost in the world he ruled. Paul was beginning to feel the pain. July 15, 2022 began just like every other day. Paul Ndamoyi stood next to his car and talked to someone nearby. He seemed calm, like a man who wasn't scared. From the moment he walked outside, he didn't know that people were looking at him. Things would change in less than a minute. It hit quickly. Two men with moved through the crowd like shadows. They pulled out their and started without saying a word. Ndamoyi's body was torn apart by bullets, which broke bones and flesh. He fell quickly and gasped for air. His blood poured out onto the ground. That wasn't the end. The men moved closer as he lay dying and choked on his own blood. The screams around them didn't bother them as they pulled out machetes. Then they moved to perform the last act, which was meant to shame as well as kill. In front of everyone, they cut off his manhood. It seemed like a very clear message. Didn't move quickly. They made sure everyone saw what they did. Fear made people stand there with their mouths open, but not able to say anything. No one was brave enough to move. No one was brave enough to speak. The killers then vanished into the night just as quickly as they had come. They didn't leave any signs, not a face to remember. Ndamoyi, who was once safe, was lying in the street, hurt. The word got around quickly. At first, no one could believe it. But by morning, the pictures were in every part of Jouberton. The man who ran the streets was like a wild animal, and everyone knew what that meant. The air was full of theories. It was said to be vengeance for the of Thabon Z. Others thought that rival gang leaders were taking back power. Some people said that his own people had betrayed him. There was always betrayal in a world of fear and power. Members of the old gang said the cutting wasn't an accident. It was a ritual and the last punishment. In hip-hop, it meant that the king who had fallen would never rise again. His legend, his fear, and his power were all buried with him. That is what his made sure of. When the police showed up, it was too late to do anything but clean up. It shocked even the most experienced officers what they saw. Not only was this but it was also a warning to everyone. Even in a place where violence is common, this kind of violence wasn't normal. The law and the people were both shaken up. The next day, Brigadier Sabata, who is the spokesperson for the provincial police, spoke to the press. He said it was a targeted and said there would be a full investigation. But many people knew the truth behind closed doors. There would be no one to see it. No names, no jail time. People in Jouberton did not have a party. Also, they didn't cry. What would happen next? They just stood there and looked at the streets. Some people saw Ndamoyi's as the end of war. It was the start of something worse for some. Power is always being claimed. There was silence in the group. The balance was no longer there. People who used to be loyal to Ndamoyi either ran away, kept quiet, or got ready for war. No one wished to be the next one. The sound of the execution was too loud to ignore. When Ndamoyi died, an era ended. The fear didn't go away though. It gave it food. It was dangerous for everyone if someone like him could be taken down in public. It was clear. Being loyal won't help you. Power won't keep you safe. The streets will always be remembered. This was about more than one man. It had to do with what the blood meant. Now that a new force had moved, the whole city was waiting. In the dark, they were waiting for the next name, body, or scream. City breathed easier now that Ndamoyi was dead. It wasn't relief though, it was fear. Brigadier Sabata went in front of the cameras only a few days after someone was killed. He looked serious, but what he said was careful. He said the reason wasn't clear, but no one believed him. It was clear that this wasn't just a murder. It was a planned that had its roots in gang revenge. He talked about disagreements and rising tensions within the group. He talked about revenge but didn't name anyone. Everyone who was watching knew that what he said was not what it seemed to be. He couldn't say anything else because it would have led to war. No one wanted to start something that couldn't be stopped. In the meantime, the streets didn't say anything. There were no tips. Nobody came forward as a witness. Everyone had their mouths shut out of fear. Jouberton needs silence to stay alive. Putting witnesses in danger seemed like a joke. Some people didn't believe it. They knew they were no longer safe when the police turned their backs on them. No one wished to be the next person found dead in the street. It meant to speak, and everyone had seen enough already. It took longer to look into things as the days went by. There was no way to get anywhere without leads or help. Like many others before it, this case went cold. Justice is just a word in these areas. It's not real. The killer had no one to blame because the city had moved on. Some people thought it would end that way. Paul Ndamoyi was violent all his life, and violently. His didn't make things better though. Something was broken and couldn't be fixed. His gang, which used to be close and feared, started to break up. For lack of a leader, the Al-Qaeda group lost its way. Different groups broke off and began fighting with each other. Small attacks happened every day. It became the norm to get even. There were still but the city didn't blink. When Paul fell, it opened a hole in the gang world. Wild things and gangs both hate empty spaces. Bad guys from a new group stepped up. They were less experienced, younger, and more dangerous. They wanted to be worse than Paul, not better. There was less organization to the violence. There are no rules, no pity. Old friends turned into enemies overnight. The shots came out of nowhere. In different parts of Jouberton, people began to whisper again, but this time they were saying new names. Paul's shadow stayed though. Some people said that his cursed the streets. Some people said his ghost watched from the streets. No matter what, no one forgot about him. People learned from and were challenged by his story. People who had lived under his rule were not freed when he died. They found even more fear. They did not miss him, but they did not get the order. Rules, no matter how harsh, are still rules. After that, there was chaos. Still, his story wasn't new. It happened a lot. The city knew this cycle all too well. After rising, one man rules with fear and dies in blood. Someone else takes his place. There's no real change. Only the faces. Only the names. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.